Good afternoon, you guys. Welcome back to Spillin' It.
Welcome back. We are here today with Angie Miller, who has been so gracious to share her story. She reached out to us with her story about her husband's battle with mental health that did end up, unfortunately, taking his life. But she has worked through everything, and she has really wanted to just create awareness. And so we're excited to hear your story, Angie.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So when did you and your husband meet?
We met in 2001.
Okay.
No, excuse me, 2003. I went back to college in 2001, and I met his stepmom and his sister in college.
Okay.
I worked full time for the airline, Northwest Airlines, and worked full time, and I decided to go back to school. So did that at night. And then after a couple of years, was dating somebody, and I was telling his stepmom that I don't know if I want to get involved with this individual. And she said, "Oh, you should meet my stepson. He bought a house in Britt, and he works for one of the mines. He's a welder, and he has a couple dogs." And I said, "Well, why didn't you mention him earlier?" Like, "Oh, I don't know." And so anyway, I gave her my phone number, and he called me and he left a message, and I fell in love with him from his voice
Really?
on the phone. Yeah. I played it. It was at the time where we had answering machines.
Sure.
Yes, yeah.
And so I used to play it for my friends and family before I even met him.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah. And then we met, it was February 22nd of 2003.
Oh my gosh, that's Rachel's birthday.
And he took me ice fishing. Looking back, that probably wasn't the smartest move to be like on a lake, frozen lake with somebody you didn't know. But anyway, but I knew.
That is Minnesota for you.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
But I
What
knew
else do we have to do in the winter?
I knew his stepmom and sister. So I thought, well, I'll be fine.
Yeah.
And then, we just, from there, we just continued to date. And then we both kind of decided, where I was 31, he was 32.
Yeah.
And we were married that November.
Oh,
of
wow.
that same year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we met and married within 9 months.
Okay, wow.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Did you have a small wedding or like
No.
a
we had
big wedding?
Big wedding. Yeah. I'm the oldest of 4. I have 3 younger brothers, and they were all married. And so I was the last one to get married. And so we had a nice, beautiful, big wedding. And it was wonderful.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so then you guys, I would love to talk. You guys both adopted. Did you try to have kids right away?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Yep. So we had tried for almost 5 years.
Okay.
And then we kind of came to the point where we just said, we're just going to enjoy what we do have and make the most of it. And, nothing happens. That's fine too. It's all good, you know?
Yeah.
And then in the fall of 2008, my brother, who also works at the same mine that Casey had worked in, called me and said, I was training a new employee, and as throughout the shift, we were talking about kids and grandkids, and he mentioned that his daughter just found out she was pregnant, and she is looking to adopt the baby out to a couple from Minnesota.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
And so my brother said, "Oh, you should call my sister and her husband." And they did.
Yeah.
And we met a week later, and 6 weeks later, our daughter Avery was born.
Oh, my
And
gosh.
So
Wow.
so we had to do a lot of work with the
Paperwork
state, and just doing all kinds of. There's
really
a lot.
quickly.
A lot was involved. And so then when we were at the hospital, I was really sick and couldn't figure it out. And 2 days later, found out I was already pregnant with our son Wyatt.
Wow.
What?
So we went from 0 to 2 kids.
Yeah.
In a really quick amount of time. So Avery was born November 1st of 2008, and then July 2nd of 2009, our son Wyatt was born.
And how soon after, when you guys kind of just were like, you know what, it's not working, we'll just enjoy our lives, how soon after that were you pregnant with Wyatt?
Pretty much instantly.
Instantly.
Wow.
Isn't
Yeah,
that crazy?
I also went to a chiropractor that same month, and I strongly believe that's something I had never done before, and I was kind of experiencing some lower back pain.
Yeah.
And so we found out we were going to adopt Avery. I went to a chiropractor, and
Wow.
So I
Wow.
don't know, do something like that if
Yeah.
you're trying to, I don't know.
Yeah,
Well,
that's such a great story.
It's wild.
Yeah.
We've had a couple people on the podcast that are just, that have,
Yeah.
they try.
Yeah.
And then as soon as they take the pressure out of
Right.
it and they're like, hey, whatever happens.
Yes.
And it's like almost
Yeah.
immediately just
Yep.
taking the stress or anxiety out of it. But
Yeah.
Yeah. And
That's
that
cool.
was, and so then I had decided to stay home with the two kids because putting both of them in daycare wasn't going to work. So yeah, I was able to stay home with them for about 6 years. And then
Nice.
Casey was the sole breadwinner. So that
Yep.
he took that role on. And yeah,
And what was his job exactly? Like you said a welder?
yes,
Okay.
that was what he had gone to school for. And then in the mining industry in the company, there was a lot of different positions you could be in. And so he worked in a lot of different departments. So he was a driller. He was a millwright. He worked on really big trucks and
Yep.
fixed that. But it was welding that was really what he wanted to do. And so
I'm
he
trying to
started doing that.
picture, like, is he literally, I'm thinking of like, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and they're like in a mine. Is it dark and like,
no, it's
not at
open.
all.
It's open.
Okay.
Yeah,
Open
it's
mine,
an
Okay.
open
I'm
mine,
like,
yeah.
The ones up in
Got it.
Virginia.
Yeah.
Yep. Like open big
Yep, and
basins
even
that
if you
have
go
roads that go down.
if you go in a city nearby in Hibbing,
Yeah.
when you go by the highway, it's all open there. You can see all of it. You
Yep.
can see the trucks. And
what? Okay.
Yeah.
I want to see that.
Yeah.
I
To
don't
take
think
a
I've
road
ever
trip
had.
this summer.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So he loved his job. Like
He
that
did.
was his thing.
Yeah, I mean, there were aspects of it that he didn't like. There was, but in general, no, he really enjoyed his job, and
Mhm.
most of his coworkers, were good to work with. And
Yep.
my siblings also worked in the mining industry. One brother worked in the same mine as he did, and then my two other brothers work at a different one. But they all, have that in common. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then Casey's dad, Tim, he worked at a local mine as in an administrative role, and
Okay.
so they always had that to talk about.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so yeah,
Common interest.
right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And when did did you see a shift or when did his like mental health kind of stuff started coming up?
Yeah,
I
I
guess.
was not aware of that. Casey was really private about that kind of stuff at first. I thought I really knew him, but that part of it he did not share with me, and so
Yeah.
I didn't quite understand. We always had big family functions, and
Yeah.
he was always really hesitant to want to go to that, and he was just sort of more put off by it. And so we would do more things with just couples kind of individually,
Yeah.
or
Sure.
he would just want to do stuff with just the two of us. And then he kind of opened up then, like just going to the grocery store or to say Target really elevated his blood pressure and his heart
Oh.
rate. And
So you
Yeah.
had some social anxiety.
yeah, he did.
Okay.
He really, so we kind of looked into that. And then, he was saying that he was then struggling with a few other things, and
Yeah.
he sought help for it. And he, reached out to my doctor at the time, and she was wonderful and got him some of the medications, but they, take a while to work.
Yeah.
Right.
And then he saw some therapists in person too, and he read a lot of books. He was so smart, and he could, read anything and just retain that knowledge. And he just
Yeah.
knew how to do all kinds of things. And so he just loved learning. And so he read a lot about different mental health issues and different things you could do to try
Sure.
and help yourself.
Yep.
Yeah. So like more trying to figure out like what did he ever ended up going on meds for that he did?
He went on meds for that while
Or-
we were married. He never sought that care before we were married.
Okay.
So he just sort of suffered kind of in
In
silence. And
Yeah.
I don't know that he knew that there was help. Maybe he did. I don't know, but
Yeah.
Well, and I think a lot of times for men in general, it's
Mhm.
such, and I mean, it can be for women don't like to talk about it either. It's just not a topic that's
No.
openly discussed. And, there's got to be
Right.
more awareness brought to it. But
right.
men in general, obviously, are more
right.
prideful, don't want to share that they're
Right.
struggling with anything.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
And I feel like sometimes too, you feel like you're burdening somebody
Mhm.
if you're telling them
Right.
like, hey, I'm struggling or
Sure.
something, or if you're having a hard time.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, that's a hard thing to recognize too.
Right.
Or if it's like not talked about in your family,
Yeah.
that
Right.
then you
And
don't know.
Right. And that's kind of, I think, how it was too with his family was a little more reserved, and
Sure.
our family was kind of the opposite of that. And,
Yep.
Yeah.
you know, so, and then once we had the kids, I think it became a little more stressful for him, like knowing that, okay, I'm the sole provider. I need
Yeah.
to, you know, make sure everything's taken care of financially and all
Right.
that. So I think that may be added to some of his, you know, stress. But again, it's just life and how
Right.
things are. But
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
So what he ended up getting hurt at his work. What exactly happened?
yeah, so he was welding, and it was in the winter of 2021. So again, February of 2021. He was doing a job that he had done many times where I think he was taking a plate off of some type of a bucket or something to repair. And so he did what he always does, and his partner was behind him with a forklift, ready to catch the piece of metal that was going to fall.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as he turned around to notify his partner that he could move up, the piece of metal dislodged, and it fell directly on his foot, his
Oof.
right foot. And so, yeah, and he had steel toe boots on, and
Yeah.
but it was probably a 500
Oh,
pound
Wow.
piece of metal, yeah, that fell kind of at an angle right onto his foot. And so he could feel that, yeah, something was definitely wrong. And
yeah.
he was kind of a fainter. Like he
Mm.
would faint at even just talking about stories of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
And so he could feel that something was happening, and he told his partner, just, you need to go get somebody. And he just kind of scooted back until he was against a wall, and he just sat there and waited, and he wouldn't let anyone take off his boots. So an ambulance came. There's medical people on the property,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
Yeah.
they were able to meet an ambulance out at the city ambulance out at the edge of the property and took him.
Yeah.
And then he wasn't able to call me for a while because he had to leave everything
Yeah.
back. And then he was able to call me a little bit later, and I went to the ER. And yeah, so that was kind of the start of, and he ended up losing 2 toes he had an operation where they had to amputate one right away, but then they put pins in another one, and it was just
Yeah.
just so uncomfortable and
Yeah.
painful for him. And so that was the beginning. And then it was, because it was a work comp issue, there was a lot of insurance stuff to deal with, and they
Yeah.
sent somebody that had to come to all of our appointments with us, and
Oh.
the doctors were pretty adamant that the individual didn't come in the room and that kind of thing. But Casey was so accommodating, and he didn't want this lady that came from the cities and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
kind of thing to, I don't know. Anyway, so that was just sort of the start of how things happened. He went to physical therapy.
Yeah.
He did all of that.
Did
he did
his
all that.
foot break or anything? Or ankle?
No,
or...
the foot didn't break. It just it basically was crushed, essentially.
Yeah.
And
And
so
it was right on the toe as opposed to like on
Yes.
the instep or something.
right.
Okay.
And so all of his he had so much nerve damage that
Yeah.
they can't repair once
Mhm.
that is
Yeah.
broken. And so then there was a lot of nerve pain that he
Yeah.
wasn't able to get relief from. And then as a result of this, his walk changed, even with physical therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His walk ended up changing, which then he ended up having back issues, which
Yep.
he already
Yeah.
had some back issues, but this really exacerbated that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so he was just always in a lot of pain and uncomfortable. And he was doing everything he could to try and get back to work. But then in December of that same year, his doctor told him that unfortunately you will never go back to work.
Oh.
And so that was kind of the catalyst for just his real rapid downfall of,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know,
So what kind of happened after he was told that? Like was he depressed, like didn't talk a lot, or kind of what was his
yeah, I mean, he yeah, he was very, very upset about it. And I think, and throughout different periods of our marriage, he would drink. And I think he was kind of trying to self-medicate at that point
Yeah.
between the pain and the disappointment of, your life not looking like you had envisioned it to be. And
Right.
Yeah.
like I said earlier, he was very wrapped up in his identity at work and
Yeah.
just, again, he really enjoyed what he did and took pride in that and thought, well, if I can't do this, what can I do? And
Yeah.
it was
Right.
kind of like, well, we'll figure it out. We'll figure something out. And
Yeah.
There wasn't any options like within the company's work to do a different role.
yeah, he didn't want to
Sure.
just do an office job
Yeah.
type of a
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And that just wasn't him.
When you're going from like doing
Right.
Mhm.
to then
Working
being
with your
like
hands and
Yeah.
office,
Yeah.
you would be the same. Like
Agreed.
you are
Yeah.
such a person who is such a doer, and when you are a doer, and you're told you can't,
Right.
Yeah.
like that's like, well,
No.
what can I do?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It'd be like me going from an office job telling me I had to do a
Right.
welding job and going, no,
Yeah.
no, thank you.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
No interest at
No.
all. I
No.
don't. Yeah. So what happened then in Casey, like I said, was drinking off and on throughout our marriage and kind of having some issues. And he had gotten hurt at our house in 2011.
Okay.
So the kids were very young and he had gotten hurt and he needed to he had fallen and he had cracked his skull in 2 places.
Oh wow.
Oh,
So
wow.
he needed an operation and he was in the hospital for about 6 weeks with rehab, that kind of thing. And I had told him that his drinking days were over and
Yeah.
if he continued, I would have to leave with the kids. And
Yeah.
so he was really upset that, I had told the doctors and I'm like, well, the doctors figured it out,
Right.
that this was the problem. And
Mhm.
so then he wouldn't go to rehab then at all. He just said, I will quit. And he did for many years. He
Mhm.
Cold turkey.
cold turkey. He was determined to do it. And
Wow,
he did.
that's awesome.
And and things were really good. And then in 2020, I'm not sure what happened. This was in May of 2020. I don't know, all of a sudden, I think thought he could go back to it and
Drink
start
again.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
okay, things are going good. I know, let's do that. And he took our son, who was about 10 at the time, I think. He really wanted to go fishing out by one of the lakes that are in our town. And he took him there. And I guess he had stopped at a liquor store and gotten vodka, it sounds like. Kind of drank that in the truck while my son was right kind of there fishing. And anyway, on the way home at a stop sign, a 4-way stop, some kids like cut him off or something. And he was angry about that. And apparently he had the vodka bottle and threw it out the window, I think.
Mm.
And these kids called 911 and we live about 8 miles from the town. And I was at home with our daughter and all of a sudden our son busted through the house and said,
Yeah.
Dad's getting arrested. And
Oh my
Oh.
gosh.
here they got his license plate, the
Mm.
kids did. And so they found out where we lived and Casey was just pulling in the driveway. So Wyatt was in the truck with him, which made it even worse
Yeah.
because he
Yeah.
had a child under the age of 12. So
Mhm.
so he was arrested and then he was back out the next day because it was COVID and
Yeah.
things were different. I don't know. I didn't have much experience with it, but
Yeah.
then at that point he wanted to go into inpatient
Okay.
and said, I need help.
Yeah.
He called Hazelton, he called a few places and was told that his life was too together, basically. That
Wow.
he still had his job, he still had his family, he still had a place to live. And they were only reserving people that had none of those things. And so
Wow.
I do sometimes wonder if had he been able to get in, maybe would that have made a difference? I don't know, but
Yeah.
Was that like their normal policy, or was it due more to COVID? Like we had to,
Yeah, I'm guessing it was maybe more due to COVID,
yeah,
or maybe it is their policy in general. I don't know, I
Yeah.
guess. But one of the alternatives for that was to do a Zoom like therapy
yep,
for treatment. And he did that for, I think it was almost a 6-week program
Wow.
by Zoom.
yep.
Did it I think it was 4 days a week for 3 to 4 hours a night. I mean, it
Wow.
was a big
Wow.
That's,
commitment.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. So and he participated and he got a lot out of it. We would discuss it sometimes or talk about some
Yep.
different things.
Mhm.
And then, yeah. And then then it was the following year that he ended up having that accident.
Okay.
And then,
Okay. So
it all just sort of, you know, life just happens and it doesn't
yeah.
always go as we think.
And it's
Yeah.
so hard when somebody's like actually reaching out for help
Mhm.
and they're like, no, you're
Mhm.
too put together.
Yeah.
You're like,
Mhm.
but
But you're
Huh?
not.
I
But
know.
you're not. But you
right.
don't have whatever the amount of money is to outright pay for it.
Yeah.
Right. I know I was saying too, I'm like, it's hard because like sometimes it's like either you have to have a lot of money for
Right.
those outpatient, like they're like, we're
Right.
sending you to California or what you're
Right.
paying a lot.
Right.
Or like you said before, like you don't have anything.
Right.
Yep.
But what about like the middle?
Right.
Yeah. It doesn't matter your
It shouldn't.
financial
Right.
standing where it is. And,
Right.
you know, everybody's got, whether you're lower class, middle class, upper class, like
Right.
there's people in every one of those classes that struggles with
Right.
alcoholism or addiction
It
or
would be
mental health.
interesting I never delved into like what studies would show, like
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
the different socioeconomic
Yeah.
variables, if that has anything to do with your recovery or,
Yep.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I don't know. It would be interesting, but
Yeah.
maybe the stats show that when you have nothing, that this recovery works better.
Right.
I would think that that wouldn't be the case,
Yeah.
just
Mhm.
because if you're like right on the edge and about to go over or
Mm-hmm.
making your way over, maybe, getting some of that help
Yeah.
would kind of,
I think
don't know.
too, like if that person is the one reaching out saying,
Right.
I
Right.
need help, that's
right.
a huge step for
Right.
people to do.
Right. And not being forced by
Yeah,
a court
it's-
system
Or your
Right.
mom or your like, hey,
Right.
or
Right.
wife or
Mhm.
husband
Right.
being like, they need to get in here. And you're like, they're like, well, like
Mhm.
that I understand. But the fact that he is the one doing it
Yeah.
Right.
knows that he felt like, okay, I do
Right.
need help.
Right.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is really sad that they're like,
Mhm.
well, actually, you're
Right.
put together. You're like,
Yeah.
wait,
Right.
you don't
Right.
even know me.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. And like a side note, our daughter has ADHD and she kind of needs a little bit more therapies and some different things. And it's kind of the same case in that. Like the state offers programs and therapies if you have medical assistance. If
Mm.
you don't, you have to pay for that out of pocket.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've talked with a lot of individuals and I'm like, why is it just meant
Mhm.
for that?
Right.
Like,
Yeah. Who
it's
made these
frustrating.
rules?
I know.
It's
Like-
it's
It is.
frustrating, but again, I understand some of it, but
Mhm.
when you're living it and you're seemingly affected by it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's kind of an unfortunate. Again, I don't know whether or not it would have ever helped him in the end, but
Right. Right. It's just another piece
Mhm.
to the puzzle.
Right.
So, going back to him getting hurt and, like the not being able to do his job and stuff, like
Right.
what was that year like for you guys?
It was hard on us, financially, emotionally. I mean, he was still getting paid, but not his full wage.
Right.
And
Right.
so there were some adjustments that we had to make, and again, he couldn't do a lot with the kids, even like
Yeah.
during the summer. My son took up golfing.
Okay.
So he would take him golfing, but he couldn't really play himself. He
Yeah.
tried a few times, but
Yeah.
he had to sit in a cart or,
Yeah.
because he struggled.
Yep.
And so, yeah, it wasn't, like he was staying home and having a lot of fun. And
Right.
Right.
and it was hard, and it took a toll on our marriage. And, like a lot of marriages, you have your
Ups and downs.
ups
Yep.
and downs.
Yep.
And yeah, we were together for 19 years,
Wow.
and so there were, yeah, it wasn't always great, but yeah, he was just like I said, and he could do anything. He was the go-to guy that everybody called. My brothers all called him.
Yeah.
If they had questions on something, he'd do plumbing. He could do repair cars. He could, anything.
Yeah.
He could watch a YouTube video and figure out, oh, okay. Or he would sit and think about something and he'd mention it like 3 days later. And I'm like, what? You've been thinking about this for 3 days or,
Yeah.
off and on. Like,
Yeah.
oh, I know I know what's wrong with this. And he genuinely was the smartest man that I ever knew. And he was just the perfect amount of, what I needed or what I wanted
Yeah.
and envisioned in a partner,
Yep.
Mhm.
where he was, you'd look at him on the outside and think he was, just very rough but he was so soft and gentle, and he was just the perfect mix of,
Yeah.
soft-hearted and kind and respectful, and
Yeah.
it just was very engaging with people, even though it was hurting him essentially and killing him to have a conversation with somebody. But he was so genuine and just
Yeah.
so kind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. No, I was just going to say, so kind of whatever you are willing or want to
Mhm.
share regarding kind of leading up, because it was what, a month from the time
was
that they
about-
kind
yeah,
of told
just-
him he couldn't do his job anymore to when everything.
Right.
happened.
Yeah. So it was probably 3 weeks, I would say, because I
Okay.
think it was just after Christmas
Uh-huh.
of that year. He had a conversation with his doctor, and he were really close, it seemed. And not every once in a while, I would hear him talking to somebody, and it would be like at 6 or 7 at night, and it was his doctor because he
Oh.
would call and just check on him because he knew, I think,
Mm.
that Casey was really having a hard time with
Yeah.
accepting this. And then just over the new year, he went ice fishing with my brother and my brother's son and Wyatt, our son. And they went, I don't know if they went to Red Lake or where they went for the weekend. And my brother said he seemed just fine and, nothing real, any issues to talk about or
Yeah.
Yeah.
looking back, he didn't notice anything. And then that particular weekend, it was the 15th of January, and our son Wyatt had a game, basketball tournament in a nearby town. And the plan was for all of us to go, and then Casey was going to go home later with Wyatt, and I was going to go to another town and have dinner with some of my aunts that were in town. And woke up that morning, and Casey said he didn't feel good. He didn't want to go. And so I thought, well, I'll figure it out. So I took Wyatt, and we had basketball, and I had talked to him probably around noon, and he seemed fine. Everything seemed normal. He felt bad he wasn't there. And then Wyatt went to a friend's house after. They went to his place, and then I moved on and met my aunts at one of my aunt's house, and we were visiting for a while before we were going to leave. And my daughter Avery called, and she was upset, saying Dad's talking to himself or yelling at somebody. I don't know what he's doing. And I said, "Oh, okay, I'll call him." So I called him, and he kind of sounded a little funny, like not himself.
Yeah.
And I said, "Did you take too many pills or, for
Yeah.
your nerve pain?" And he said, no. And I said, okay, well, I don't know. Avery seems to think something's going on. We hung up, and 10 minutes later, my daughter called again, and she was pretty hysterically crying, saying she was in bed under the covers and she was scared that her dad was yelling. And I said, okay, I'm going to come home, stay on the phone with me.
Yeah.
I actually ended up hanging up on her, calling Casey's dad, Tim, who lived in the same area we did. I said, can you please go out to the house? Avery will come outside and let her sit in the truck until I get there.
Yeah.
And so I called Avery back, talked to her the whole time. I didn't really hear anything, I don't think. I had gotten home and Tim was already there with Avery in the truck. I got out and I said, Tim, I don't know what's going on. Maybe we'll just plan to stay with you tonight. I don't know if he's drinking, if,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll go in, I'll grab some stuff for the kids and and I'll come over. So if you want to go, I'll just meet you. And he said, no, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And so I went in the house and Casey was sleeping in the recliner and I kind of woke him up and I said, hey, what's going on? You were scaring Avery and I had your dad come out and I said, your dad's outside now if you want to go say anything or talk to him.
Yeah.
And so he went out and he only had a t-shirt and shorts on. And I was like, okay.
And it was January.
And it was January, so it
Yeah.
was cold. And
Yeah.
so he went out and I started putting some stuff together for the kids and was walking out of our kitchen to go outside. And Casey came back into the house and slammed the door. And he unleashed on me and he called me all kinds of names. He had never, ever called me before. And he just turned into a completely different person. I
Wow.
did not know him
What was
at
your,
all.
like, were you like, what is going on?
Oh, yeah. I had
Yeah.
bags of clothes and pillows for the kids, and I just dropped them because he started coming after me. And for a second, I thought, our front door we never used.
Yeah.
And so I knew it was dead bolted, and I knew there was snow behind that. So I'd have to open the door, get out through the deadbolt, and then push a screen door
Right.
kind of thing.
With this, yeah.
And I thought, oh, can I do that in like a second?
Right.
And by the time I was thinking about it, I was also backing up, kind of trying to back away. And he was coming after me with his fist in the air. And I dropped the items that I had and I fell backwards and fell on the floor. And he came on top of me. And we were kind of in our hallway area. And he started punching me. And
My gosh.
he was very strong.
Yeah.
And I was trying to cover my head and I was yelling, that Casey, it's me. It's me. It's
Yeah.
Angie. I'm your wife. Look at me. And I
And
was
he was just, you could tell when he was not there.
No, not at
Yeah.
all. And I was yelling for his dad, but I knew his dad wasn't going to hear me because
He's
he
in
was
the truck.
out in his
Yeah.
running truck with the windows up. And so I just I don't know, just decided, okay, he's right on top of me. And I grabbed his private areas, squeezed him there, pushed him down, and was able to knock him down. And I was able to then just run out the back door. And I ran to the truck, jumped in, and I was screaming. And I took my daughter's phone and called 911. And I said, I don't know what's going on, but
Yeah.
I need help here. And so we were sitting in our driveway, and we live in the country, so we have a bigger driveway. And the way my father-in-law was parked, we were facing the side door, and there's a big spruce tree there. And so it was kind of blocking the door, but it was just getting to be, the sun was just going down. So our motion light went on and the back door opened, and I said, oh my gosh, Tim, he's coming out here.
Yeah.
Let's go. I don't
Yeah.
know what he's
Yeah.
going to do.
Right.
And I called 911 again, and my father-in-law started leaving our driveway, and we were going to head down the road. And as we were doing that, I was on the phone with 911 saying, where are they? They need to come quickly. And as I was talking to them, we heard a gunshot.
Mm.
And our daughter was screaming, and I started screaming. And I said, I think he shot himself. And my father-in-law turned around to then go towards back to our driveway. And I was yelling, no, we can't go back to the house. And 911 was saying, no, please go the other way, go north. And we started driving just real slow on the shoulder. And an unmarked trooper came in front of us.
Yeah.
And talked with us. And then they had basically closed down the road, and then had my father-in-law take me and him and Avery up to a restaurant that was about a mile away.
Okay.
And so we went there, and then I got in the back of a police car and told the trooper the same story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I could hear them like on the radio. They were thinking that Casey had left the property
Hmm.
and was on our four-wheeler through the woods. And so I went, okay, wait a minute. So he didn't shoot himself.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
was shooting at us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so there was just none of this made sense to me.
Right.
Yeah.
I was just so confused. My life
I
went
can't imagine.
from,
Yeah.
okay, things are, not great, but not this level of,
Yeah.
Yeah.
chaos.
Did his dad say anything about like what they talked about that like all of a sudden he was mad? Do you know why?
I do remember that Casey I had came out to the truck because Avery wanted one of her stuffed animals. So I ran in quick to grab that and came back out, and Casey was talking to his dad. And I heard him say something about, I think he said, can I swear?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he said, this bitch here. And
Oh,
his
boy.
dad said, Casey, that is not okay. You cannot say that.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm just grabbing my stuff. We're going to head out. So
Yeah.
I'll be just a second, Tim. And then
Okay.
that's when what happened on the inside. And thank
Okay.
God Tim stayed.
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I don't think that I would be here if he didn't.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
I
that's
really don't.
scary. Yeah.
Yeah, because I left the house I thankfully just had my shoes on, but I
Yeah.
didn't have my purse, my phone. I had nothing. So
And how old was your daughter at this time?
she
too?
was 13.
13. Okay. And he had never before this time
Mhm.
domestic abuse was not
No.
even.
No, never, not at all.
Yeah.
That's why it was just so unusual and just so out of character. And I
Like-
just kept trying to snap him out of it. Like,
Yeah.
Casey, this is me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is your wife. And I don't know what took over. So anyway, so then I'm in the back of this police car
Yeah.
going, okay, so is he alive? Is he now what? So we waited there. So they just had us sitting there. And then when I told the officers that he has a lot of weapons, then it became
Oh,
this
yeah.
whole thing. Like
Mm.
I had to, write, draw a map of where we called it our gun room in the
Yeah.
basement. And
Yeah.
how many guns do I think he has? I have no idea. I'm
Yeah.
not interested in any of that.
Right.
So I have no idea. I know we have a lot.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Was he a hunter?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was an avid hunter,
Yep.
trapper, fisherman.
Yep.
Yeah. So he did all of that. He had he would do archery too.
Yep.
He
Yep.
hunted with bow and arrow. So he had all of that stuff. So then the officers became concerned that,
For their safety.
of
Yeah.
course,
Yep.
Yeah.
and apparently he had some type of like a watch, like a smart watch,
Yeah.
and apparently that was pinging in different places. So I
Hmm.
think that was causing some confusion.
Yeah.
And then they put a drone in the air and were trying to see if they could find him, and they couldn't. And then supposedly 2 officers went from the north of our house to around it, and then they stopped where Casey's truck was parked outside of our garage, which then you can see the side door where he would have came out and shot. And our light was on above that door,
Mm.
and the lights were on in the house, and they said that they never saw him. And so they were thinking he either went back in the house then, and then so this happened all around 6 o'clock, I would say. This whole thing started.
Okay.
And then we were still at this place,
The
the
restaurant?
parking lot of the
Or
restaurant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was having to get a hold of, again, I didn't have my phone. So my daughter had our son's phone. So I was able to text him, and I said, can you give me your friend's mom's number? I knew them, but not super well.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to text her and just say, hey, something came up. Can you keep Wyatt for a little bit longer than
Right.
maybe
Yeah.
you planned?
Yeah.
And oh yeah, no problem, no problem. So I'm like pretending like my life is fine
Right.
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
somebody, and then
Yeah.
like, okay, I don't know what's going on. I
Right.
knew my dad's phone number by heart, so I called my dad and talked with him a little bit, and I just said, I just don't know. And Avery had been trying to contact Casey on the phone. And when she would text him, it would look like bubbles would come up.
Oh.
So then that was
Weird.
another
Yeah.
thing that made us think, oh my gosh, so is he in the house now? They looked with the drone in our windows and they just didn't see him. So then they thought he was like in the basement.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where our room was. And so they were told, the officers were told, okay, we need to stand down and we need to just go home and we'll look into it tomorrow.
Like look
Hmm.
for him?
Yeah.
Like they, oh,
Like, and so they were like,
Ow.
Angie, are you okay with going to your father-in-law's? We can't prohibit you from going to your house, but we would recommend that you not.
Right.
And I said, no, we'll go to my father-in-law. So we went and got our son. Yeah, ran to McDonald's quick because nobody had eaten for hours. And
Right.
anyway, ended up at my father-in-law's at about 8:30, 9 o'clock, but still not knowing anything.
Right.
yeah.
Like, is he alive? Is he dead? So obviously I didn't sleep all night. The kids were trying to contact him.
Mm-hmm.
I was just crying throughout the night. Just
Yeah.
like, it just didn't make sense. It
Yeah.
was like, what is going on? And then the officers were like, give us a call if you hear from him. I'm like, oh, okay. So at 8 o'clock in the morning, I immediately called the sheriff's office and I said, I have not heard from him. My kids haven't heard from him. What's the plan? And he said, well, we're going to have a meeting at about 10 o'clock and decide what we're going to do. And I'm talking to some other people and they're like, what if Casey tried to take his life in the house? What if he needs medical attention?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why didn't they send an ambulance?
So
And
they never went into the house.
no, they wouldn't go. They say they wouldn't go. They came onto our property, supposedly. But in the end, if they did what they said they did, they would have seen him.
Okay.
So they
And
just probably assumed when you had said that you had heard a gunshot,
Right.
and then when you had said he has a lot of weapons, that they automatically
Right.
were like, all right, we could end up in a standoff situation.
Right.
We can't really enter the house safely.
Right. And so the other officers on the scene were trying to, there was a dog that was available that they had that they wanted to send in, and their different ideas were shot down by the acting sheriff, and he wasn't on the scene, but other individuals on the scene were really trying to persuade him to let them do more, and they
Yeah.
wanted to see this to the end. They didn't want to stop. Apparently, one of the officers said, we've never been told we have to go home, and
Yeah.
other people I learned later that were listening to this on scanners. I've never really listened to a scanner, but
Right.
No.
other people were listening to it and then kind of going, okay, they were saying there's somebody, a gunman, possibly in the woods. And now they're saying, okay, we're going home.
Yeah.
But nothing's been resolved.
Yeah.
And so I kind of learned later that there was some type of a law that went into effect that same day, I believe, that Saturday,
Wow.
Wow.
that kind of restricted things for officers in going into, places because Casey had no prior convictions of anything.
Right.
Mhm.
On paper, they were like, he's not a threat.
Yeah.
He's
Right.
not a danger to the community.
Yep.
Yeah.
He has no prior convictions other than a DWI, but no violent
Right.
Yeah.
convictions. That's why the sheriff had said, I'm not going to put my guys at risk of this being a suicide by cop type thing. So that's why they called it off. But then again, the next day, they still didn't seem like they knew what they were going to do. And I was then kind of saying, well, he assaulted me. So
Yeah.
he should be arrested, right? Like,
Right.
And again, I kind of look back and think if I was, somebody that had been involved, had been abused, and
Right.
I would have really felt not supported at that point because
Yeah.
Right.
I was just kind of told, hey, can you go somewhere else and
Yeah.
let us know if you hear from him? Well, I
Like,
don't.
what if he came?
Right.
I
Right.
mean, it
He
wouldn't be
totally
that hard to
knew.
go like,
obviously
oh, I'm going
knows
to your
where
dad's
his- yeah.
house.
Right. He
Yeah.
totally knew where we
Yeah.
were going to be.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so my father-in-law, he goes to church out by where we live. So he had said, I'm going to go to church and I'm going to drive by the house and I'm going to see if there's any tracks because it had snowed
Yeah.
Yeah.
that night. So he drove by and he said, there's no tracks in and out of your driveway, but you can't see the side door because of the tree that was kind of in the way. And it was
Yeah.
January. We had a lot of snow that was pushed up from plowing that was kind
Yeah.
of, you couldn't see it. And so Tim went to church, he came back and he had talked to Casey's sister and said, you know what, we're just going to go out. We're going to talk to him. Now we're all assuming he's alive.
Hmm.
And so he said, we're just going to go talk to him. We're going to see what we can do. And they drove in there. And as soon as and ironically, what happened is because I didn't have my cell phone, I had been texting some of my brothers. And one of my brothers texted just as they were getting into the driveway. And it said, oh, I'm sorry. I've been asleep. I can't believe this happened.
Yeah.
And Casey's dad thought it was Casey that texted this. And so he's looking at his phone as they're driving into our driveway and saying, oh, well, it sounds like he's just getting up. And so they drove farther in and his sister said, oh my God, no, he's out here. He's been out here the whole time. And she just ran. And I don't know that she touched him or she did anything, but she knew he was dead. And then his dad came and looked and saw what had happened. And then they called 911 and then
Was he outside?
He was outside.
He was outside.
So it was that gunshot.
It was that gunshot. Again, so then his sister called Avery, my daughter's phone, and said, we found him. He's gone. And
oh my goodness.
so I kind of collapsed and the kids were kind of behind me and were both crying. And I got off the phone with her and I said, he's gone. Dad is gone. And then one of the things that sticks with me most is just their initial utter cry.
Yeah.
And their sounds that I never heard before
Yeah.
came out of them. And so we were kind of hugging each other and trying to, I don't know, we're in a place, that was just a really, really hard, about 10 minutes, I think we were alone. And then my sister-in-law had called my brothers and some other people. And before I knew it, the apartment started filling up with people and with some friends and that had been there earlier and stuff. And so, so then the officers came back and the medical examiner and then, so then that's how we found out that it was indeed that first gunshot.
Oh, what a
Was the
weird,
one.
confusing
Right.
Yeah.
day.
Right.
Or
It was-
24 hours.
Right. It was just a lot of, and just so many unanswered questions. Like, it just did not make sense. And I was became a little bit, I was upset. I was angry at some of the law enforcement officers and not, none of it made sense.
Yeah.
And I was angry that his dad and his sister found him. And, I can't imagine what that's,
Mhm.
like
that's-
to find, someone you love so much. And
Yeah.
so, so then that was the start of our, journey of.
Yeah. Did he leave a note or was it like it was a
It was
No.
so
very
spontaneous.
fast-
It was just spontaneous. I often wonder if he kind of came to and realized, like, oh my gosh, I just assaulted my wife.
Yeah.
I am going to be going to jail. I'm not able to work. I'm not able
I'm not going
to,
to be able to see my kids anymore.
and
Yeah.
I'm done. This is it.
Yeah.
And I think he must have gone downstairs and yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
And my brothers, so I guess what happens then is that people had come into our house then. They had to go through everything.
Right.
They had to get all of his medication. They had to take inventory of all kinds of things. And
Mm-hmm.
my brothers and their wives had gone there later because they were told that the house was a mess. And so I don't know if anyway.
He was like frantic.
Right. And I guess there was a bunch of guns that were laid out in the gun room. And I don't know if those were laid out
Right. You never really went down
before
there.
or
Right.
So I mean, again, there wasn't a lot of time between what had happened, with me and then the gunshot. I mean, there really wasn't.
Did they ever do, like the medical examiner, like do any kind of toxicology?
Yes.
Like was there alcohol
Yes.
mixed with prescription drugs and medications that maybe caused some?
The toxicology report showed that his numbers with the drugs he was on were all as they were supposed to.
Okay.
So he didn't have any larger amount of some type of drug, but it listed ethanol intoxication as a contributor
Got
to his death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was like, what does that mean? So I had to kind of look it up, and it was just I don't know what it might have said what his blood alcohol level was. I don't know, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So how did you guys, I think what's so hard about suicide, and Ethan and I have walked through it with family also, is it's so, you have a lot of unanswered questions almost.
Right.
And how do you feel like from then until now, do you feel like you're just going, okay, it was just a circumstance? Like it's hard to kind of, I don't know, like move on without feeling like you're like, I want answers.
Some closure.
Right. Yeah. It hasn't been easy. I think I've kind of come to realize after it's been just over 3 years, I've accepted it, but I haven't like embraced this life yet. I don't know how to say that so it makes sense. I mean, I've obviously had to move on with it because you don't have a choice when I had 2 young children, a 12 and 13-year-old.
Yeah.
And so, we had to just start over and try and figure things out. And, which, we have, or we, have been doing, but I'm still not just I still haven't just, I've accepted it, but I haven't like embraced it. Like,
right.
And I mean, some people do maybe with these type of things or with other things in life, whether it's an injury or if it's a, illness, or I've embraced this, I've accepted this, and I'm going to. So I've obviously accepted it, but it's just, it's just really hard to find I don't even know.
Your
like
almost new normal.
Right.
Kinda.
Yeah. Right. It's not, it still doesn't completely feel normal or right, but it's a lot better as time goes by. Time really does help. But I think almost every day, I think I do shed a tear. I don't weep, but I do get teary-eyed, and I do think of him.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Every day, and I try and say his name out loud as often as I can.
Yeah.
And, to talk to him, about him with the kids. And, sometimes they want to talk about it. Our son is, he doesn't really talk about it a lot. He's very black and white, kind of like Casey was. And it's like, not a ton of emotion, but
Yeah.
I think, he's doing okay. And our daughter really struggles. They were very close.
Yeah.
I found out like probably a year ago that she would still text his number
Oh,
and
yeah.
kind of like a diary almost, or
Yeah.
just
Wow.
talking to him. I don't know if his number is still his per se.
Right.
Why probably would get a notification.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, this poor guy
Yeah,
or girl,
whoever.
whoever.
I saw a thing on Instagram of this daughter who texted her dad every single day.
Okay.
And then like 10 years later got a response and said, I know I'm not your dad, but I've been reading this every day. And it was like this
Wow.
really awesome response where
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Jeez.
Like, please never stop. I
Right.
love
Yeah.
hearing from you.
Yeah.
Even though
And-
it's like not to him, but
Right.
you
right.
know,
But she's
reading
still,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just kind of what's been, and then you just kind of, go or think about what the things that he's missing and
Yeah.
stuff. And,
Yeah.
Yeah.
just all the different milestones. And our son
Right.
is going to, he'll have his driver's license in July. And, they're just growing up and
Yeah.
just how much he was just such a good dad.
Yeah.
And he would have, really enjoyed the kids.
The age and the
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he loved watching them play sports or, just hanging out with them and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Teaching them things.
Yeah. Do you feel like when people like talk to you and stuff like family, friends, do you feel like people try not to talk about him because they feel like it's gonna make you sad?
Well, I don't think my family is that way because I talk about him all the time.
Yeah.
But maybe some other people that don't know us as well. But
Yeah.
I've often said, the worst thing has already happened.
Yeah.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
so you talking about it isn't going to make it any worse
Yeah.
because he's, and I love to hear stories.
Yes. Yeah.
Like somebody will say, oh, I remember, when this happened, or, it's just
Yeah.
fun
Yeah.
to hear about it. And
Yeah.
so for me anyway, I somebody else could be totally different,
Right.
but for me, I really enjoy hearing about him and talking about him. And
Mhm.
Well, and I think it'd be completely different had circumstances been different leading up to it.
Right.
Had he been an abusive husband
Right.
or father that,
right.
dealt with that just circumstantial could have been a
Right.
lot different. So,
Yes.
but I mean, I would imagine with a spouse, it was as incredible as he sounds
Right.
like he was, incredible husband, incredible
Dad.
dad,
Yeah.
like that it would be so much harder to move on past something like this. Whereas
Right.
if somebody was in an abusive situation,
Right.
if this ended up happening, there's almost
Yeah.
a little bit of relief
Sure.
as
sure.
well as it's still sad. But
Right.
yeah, I can totally
Right.
understand where you're
And
coming from.
and in some ways, it was a relief in terms of, okay, he's not in any more pain,
Yeah.
or he's not.
Yeah.
But like you said, I don't know what people's perception really is about suicide. I think it adds a whole nother something to the mix of it. Like,
Yeah.
Right.
so there's a death, and then there's death by suicide, and that just I understand it. People aren't always comfortable, but
Mhm.
for me and for my kids, I don't ever want to shy away from the truth or from what it was. That particular small snapshot of that day, granted, it changed the trajectory of all of our lives, of a lot of lives.
Yeah.
It wasn't who he was,
Yeah.
though. And
It didn't define him.
no, not at all.
Yep.
And so I'm not gonna not speak about him, or because that's not the life that he's so deserving of so much more of.
Right.
That did not define him, that one act of
Right.
the finality of all of that. And again, we talked about, he reached out for help. He did a lot of the
Mhm.
things that we're told to do, and
Yeah.
for whatever reason, it just, for him, it just didn't work.
Yeah.
And to have to accept that,
Yeah.
again, it's
hard.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not comfortable. It's, you know, it it hasn't been easy. And it was important to me. I wanted to stay where we were at the house. I was very thankful that he didn't do it inside of the house.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but s- also, Casey had bought the house before we were married. He had already lived there, and I sold my previous home, and we were always kind of looking for another house, but never really found anything that
Yeah.
we really liked. But I had found out that when Casey bought the house, it was in maybe 1999 or 2000. The people that sold him the house, their daughter, who was, I believe she was 13 or 14, she killed herself in a closet in one of the bedrooms of the house.
Oh my goodness.
And so
You didn't
we-
find this out till
we knew that.
Oh,
you did.
They had to
disclose
disclose
it.
something
Yeah,
like
I was gonna
that,
say.
Right.
an unnatural death. So Casey had told me that, and we never said anything to anybody.
Mhm.
But I, was like, ugh. And I like to think I'm a very spiritual person, and I, love the Lord, and I just really wanted to stay here, but I didn't want that hovering, that
Yeah.
suicide,
Darkness. Mhm.
that heaviness,
Yeah.
kind of hanging over us, and walking over the threshold of where they
Yeah.
found him every day. And
Yeah.
so I did a complete revamp of our house and a complete remodel and added on to it, and just thought, we just have to move forward as hard as it is.
Mhm.
And we just, have to live in a way that would make him proud every day. And so,
Yeah. That's
so we've just kind of done that, and
yeah.
just are still able to stay on the property, still,
Yeah.
happy to be there, but it's just different now. It's just different,
Right.
you.
It's like you live in this house for so long, and that it's like even
Right.
our house, there's so many things because he's a very handy person too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, everything would be
Yeah.
like, Ethan made that.
Right.
Ethan did this.
Right.
Ethan fixed that.
Yeah.
It's a
Right.
lot of reminders, but also
Mhm.
it makes you it's like a comfort feeling
Right,
too.
right.
Of like,
that he's been here, and
mm-hmm.
yeah, and too, just wow, yeah, stuff I took for granted, all the things that he did. I'm so uninterested in figuring out how to fix something.
Yeah.
Right.
Thankfully, our son is very interested, and he has just been such a huge help, and
Yeah.
Mhm.
in wanting to learn different things, and
Yeah.
so but yeah, Casey just took such great care of
Yeah.
us, our house, our property, and really enjoyed doing that. And
Yeah.
I really do not enjoy doing that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of a whole. It's like I am not interested in this,
Yeah.
Mhm.
but thankfully,
And you have your brothers and your
yes,
father-in-law?
yes,
Father-in-law.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
So can I ask, like during this time, what was one of the most helpful things that family or friends had shown up for you?
Yeah.
That like if your friend was in a situation like this,
Yeah.
you're like, this was helpful for me. This is how I would.
Right. A lot of people just showed up at our house with, here's some food. Here's,
Yeah.
a gift card for whatever. We don't want you guys to have to think about doing anything. People
Yeah.
that just did stuff and didn't ask,
Yeah.
can I do this? And it's always obviously something that I just realized so many people want to do something, and they want to help you
They do.
because they hurt
Yeah.
Yeah.
so much
Yep.
with you. And
Mhm.
Yeah.
so I just realized, people just came and helped us, and helped us get through it, and
Yeah.
and took the kids and helped with them, and just kind of made sure things were done and taken care of. And
I always feel like when
Yeah.
you're at I always like picture it as like a bird that has went right into the window and it's
Mhm.
fallen, and you kind of care for it
Yeah.
until it's walking again.
right,
Yep.
And it's like you can't even
Right.
like people just carry you.
right,
Yeah.
And it's
Right.
like their way of
a
showing
good
love
analogy.
because you really can't
Right.
like even
right,
you feel like you can't even do anything.
Right.
And so it's like
right.
they're just carrying you.
Right. And like I said, people want to do things they want, but the journey, you know, it's just something you have to just do on your own.
Yeah.
They can help and ease the burden and kind of ease the pain, but
Be a shoulder. Yeah.
right. But it's something that you genuinely just you have to just walk right through it, and
Yeah.
you don't have a choice, but it's comforting and helpful to know that there's other people
Yeah.
that are right next to you or behind you or
Yep.
in front of you, and
Yeah.
you know, kind of
Was there anything that wasn't helpful, do you feel like?
people that said
People
things
say
like,
stuff.
oh, he's in a better place, or
Mm.
and again, I can be extremely socially awkward as well and say things that aren't necessarily helpful, or
Right.
but it's kind of like, if you don't know what to say to someone that's grieving, just say that. Just say,
Yeah.
I am so sorry, I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
And just, if they're open to, you know, a physical touch, a hug, whatever.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But you know, but saying stuff like that was kind of off-putting.
Yeah.
Like, well, no, he was in a good, I mean,
Yeah.
he was in a good place. I
Yeah.
get it.
It's like they try to say something.
Yeah, you
and then
wanna
it comes
be-
off.
yeah.
You're like,
Right. It just didn't. It
Listen.
didn't. No,
I
it
know you
didn't.
mean well, but
Right.
yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
people said to us, like when we went through all this stuff with Nevaeh, I was like, it couldn't have happened to a better family because you guys are so medically, like you guys are good at that. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Don't say that.
Right.
Like
Right.
I,
Right.
but
You
I
guys
just,
are equipped to handle a situation like that. Doesn't mean we want to go through it.
No.
Doesn't make it any easier.
And
No.
two, I think what a lot of people do, and I've been guilty of it in the past probably too, but just not saying like, oh, you know, like interjecting yourself or your,
experience kind of.
and just saying, oh, I know what it's like. My grandpa killed himself too, and
yes.
it's just kind of like, maybe just saying, can't imagine the pain you're going through right now, or
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
but just kind of let it be about that person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe at a later time have a conversation and say,
Yeah.
you know, my grandpa died by suicide, or
Yeah.
you know, and maybe open up a dialogue that way, kind of.
Yep.
Mhm.
I just kind of like to, if someone's grieving or hurting or
Mhm.
putting yourself, that's not going to
Yeah.
really help a lot. And
And every situation, whether it's comparing two suicides, they're all
Right,
different.
right,
Yeah.
It's all
of course,
different.
right.
Everybody,
right,
the situation was different. It's handled
Right.
different by each individual.
Right,
You know, there's
right.
so much complexity.
Especially when you're like, it's like just happened.
Right.
And you're like, I can't even think about
right,
that right now.
Right.
Like I'm just trying to,
just
know.
get through. Yeah, and
Yeah.
and it's amazing what your brain and your body does to protect you. And there's a
Mhm.
lot I don't remember, and it's probably good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and when I do replay a lot of things in my mind and in my head, and sometimes I just really have to just try and stop. Like,
Yeah.
what could I have done anything different? Could I have
Yeah.
changed this, or you know? And again, I just really truly believe that we serve a God that can do anything, and
Mm.
you know, I know that for whatever reason this happened, but something good will come.
Yeah.
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 Something good will come.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
Incredible,
yeah,
inspiring.
Yeah.
Your resilience, Angie, is incredibly
thank you.
inspiring. Yeah. Just the strength that you've shown
Yeah.
through all of this, just sharing your story, and
Mhm.
just obviously the strength that you've been for your kids
right.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
your extended family who's all
Mhm.
been impacted by this is so commendable.
Yeah.
And you will just be in our continued prayers
Yeah.
as like you said, it takes time.
Yeah,
3 years is still,
Right.
it's still hard to think
Right.
about it.
yeah,
But we really appreciate you sharing your story, and we know it'll be incredibly inspiring
Yeah.
to others, just
Yeah.
as it was
Yeah.
to us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So-
I appreciate the time.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Yes.
All right, you guys. See you in the next one.
Thank you guys.
Bye.